Kait and Laurie, welcome. I'm so excited to finally have you guys on. Words are very hard.
I understand that.
We know that.
Sometimes my brain is moving so fast through space that it's like, oh no, the words are not there because my brain is moving faster than my mouth. Yeah.
Yeah. Or if you ever envisioned this moment of how it was going to go and what you were going to say. And then all of a sudden it's happening real time, real life. And as it's playing out real time, real life in your brain, you're like, I'm totally fucking this up right now and I can't stop the train.
But okay. You have to admit that you've also had this experience where your brain is out there and you're talking and you're kind of going, holy shit, this sounds good. What I'm saying is making sense. And I didn't.
Yeah. Those moments are good too.
Yeah, those are good moments. For sure.
Yeah.
It's not usually as bad as you think it is. Even when you think it's really going badly, it's not usually as bad as you think.
Yeah.
This is what Sarah always reminds me of after I do an event and I have that colossal meltdown after, it was so terrible. And she's like, just shut up. It's fine.
You don't need that friend to tell us to shut up.
Yeah. Right? Just stop it. You're ridiculous, and it's hilarious because I think, and I don't know if you guys can relate to this now that you're doing more speaking, of which, by the way, we'll talk about that since apparently we just jumped right into this podcast. But I almost black out every time I do a workshop or a presentation. And I don't know what comes out of my mouth, but it's usually pretty good, but I can never repeat it twice. It's like this total, blackout moment, which probably doesn't make me a great speaker because nothing can be repeated, but it never fails, right?
No, but okay, I'm going to correct you there. I think it makes you a great speaker because it makes you authentic. Because I felt that way the first time we presented a big training in Boston. I literally could not tell you what I said. But the feedback was you're so authentic. I'm so grateful that you're so transparent and so honest. And I was like, great.
Yes.
Feedback.
It's not something that's too scripted.
No, nobody wants to listen to you just reading from a paper. So I think it actually makes you, I've been to your workshops. They're fun and fucking tastic. Am I allowed to say that on here? Sorry.
Well, yes, it's my podcast. Of course you can swear. Yeah. I don't know how to get through life without swearing. So, which is really unfortunate sometimes, but.
Okay. Yeah. I just want to say, I think the only way to avoid that colossal meltdown at the end is to never do anything that gets you out of your comfort zone.
Agreed.
To never do anything meaningful or hard or important.
Yeah.
Because you're going to have that.
That's true. That's true. That's a great point. And it's actually a beautiful point that you need to have those meltdowns because it just means that you probably did something great. Right. And so let's unpack this a little bit. Okay. So I have Kait and Laurie here, right? And we're talking about speaking and you two speaking at Boston, speaking about Mezzo Allies, your very new nonprofit organization that is helping survivors of family-based sex trafficking. However, when I first met you, Kait, and when we had our first call, which by the way, I don't even think it was a full year. Okay. You would have thrown up all over yourself if you would have said, I'm talking on a stage about my story in Boston, what the what? And not even that, when I first found you in my Google rabbit hole, okay, and started listening to your podcast, The Ugly Truth About the Girl Next Door, you've done a total 180 from Laurie trying to extract everything out of you and you kind of telling your story, but not really telling your story. And it was a little bit fragmented because it's not the easiest thing in the world to talk about. Right. To now where you're yep, I'm calling you out on your shit. Fuck you. This is my story. And I don't want anybody else to deal with this. And you're this bold, beautiful, strong, resilient woman. It's almost this, the only way I can describe it is this lotus flower coming out of the swamp and just blooming. And it's been the coolest thing to experience and watch. Right. So I, to that end, why don't you guys can you unpack a little bit, where you started, what like the impetus of why you even started the podcast in the first place? Because I think why you started and who you were then is very different to your why now and who you are today. So walk me through that journey.
Well, so we always say that the podcast started. So first of all, I never walked into Laurie's office and was like, hey, I'm a trauma survivor. Like, you want to do a podcast with me someday? Like, that would have been like a hell no, right? The podcast was born truly out of a place of desperation. I was being threatened. I was being stalked. I was being actively assaulted. And there was nowhere to go with it. There was nowhere to, we had exhausted every option. We had talked to anti-trafficking, organizations. We had talked to law enforcement. We had been through every avenue we could think of. And so podcast was born out of a place of, one, if we make it public, then we are putting these offenders on notice that we're no longer hiding. I'm no longer the little kid hiding under the bed. Right. And so I am making it, I'm calling them out, and I'm no longer keeping their secret. And two, truthfully, and this is always like really hard to say, but it was a feeling of the threats were so intense, and I was afraid that the worst case scenario would happen, that they would eliminate me from the world. And at least if I had a podcast, even if nobody listened, I would have said my story. I would have said my experience in my words, in my voice, and nobody would be able to contest that, right? It would be someday, if they actually kill me or they actually whatever, at least this will exist out in the world, and nobody can say I didn't speak up, or I didn't say it, right? Yeah. So that's where it was born. And so that is why the beginning of the podcast is very fragmented, because we weren't podcasters. Like, we were podcasting with like one microphone on a pillow with an iPad. Like, so for people who actually podcast, like, yeah, we know we're embarrassing, but
by the way, that made it fun to listen to. I was like, oh, that is so what would happen to me, So like, there's that authenticity, right? So that was, I enjoyed that personally. So
yeah, I know, and people did, I think, yeah.
I'm just thinking about the fact that the first episode we recorded and posted is called Finding My Voice, because really where we started, we just started with like, okay, this is, from my perspective, it is so important for you, Kait, to feel like you have has been stripped from you for so long. We have to start somewhere, recapturing your ability to speak up, to say what you need. And that's where we began. And it was desperation, and it was messy.
Yeah, it was really messy. And it was hard because it was something, at every turn I kept feeling, every new episode in the very beginning was, I don't know if people are going to believe me. I don't know if this is like, I don't know. And it started with, oh my God, 10 people listened, and it was all of Patrick's family, so it was not, we were like so excited, like, oh my God, 10 people, 15 people listen, Yeah. The podcast, a lot of people ask us if the threats happened because of the podcast. And it's actually the reverse. The threats were happening, and we called it out on a public platform. And then, so we podcasted for a long time. And then at some point, I actually got connected to a support group of women who, 100+ women across the country who have eerily similar stories to mine. They have eerily similar experiences. And I started connecting with them and talking with them, and the reality of how young their abuse started, and the trafficking that was happening, being facilitated by their parents or caregivers, and that they were continuing to be harmed and threatened into adulthood. I remember texting Laurie and being like, it's not just me. Like, I'm not alone in this. Like, this is not just my story. This is actually a pretty big thing. And yet nobody's talking about it. And so it popped our heads up out of the desperation feeling and the terrified. And I mean, we were still terrified. But we were kind of like, oh my God, nobody's talking about this. And that is what makes survivors so stuck, is because there's just a lack of information out there. And so that's really how our vision I remember when I came to you, it was like, we maybe want to start a nonprofit, but like, I don't know how to do that at all. because we knew that, like, how can we just ignore the fact, like, this is no longer just my story. This is a problem that's happening. And then we started doing research and we started finding the statistics, right? 42% of all trafficking victims. So if you think, I mean, across the board, all trafficking victims, 42%, it starts with a family member or caregiver. It blew our minds, right? And yet we're not talking about that. We're talking about pimp controlled. We're talking about gang controlled. We're talking about people being lured from the internet, right? And yet 42% of people say it was my parent or caregiver who initially trafficked me. So that is kind of where we were like, all right, I didn't like set out for my life to be, a nonprofit founder. I was like fine just doing my, I'm a social worker at a nursing home. Like I was like hanging with my old people, like doing my thing. But it was like, how do we not step into this space? And our mantra has been, if not us, then who, right? If we don't, who is going to? Because there are not organizations that are talking about this. They're talking about it very, very low level in terms of just like, when it's generational, if the mom was already kind of in the sex industry, the sex trade industry, sometimes that gets passed down to their children, but they were not talking about this idea of human trafficking. So that is how we got to where we are. As far as like the transformation of speaking, at every turn that what I thought was going to happen of people aren't going to believe me or people will hate me, because those are the narratives, right? The narrative has always been people will hate you, people won't believe you, people will leave you. And so every time that didn't happen, I had a sense of, okay, maybe it wasn't me, right? Maybe those were lies. Maybe it was them that said that and they weren't right about that. To be honest, I still battle that every single fucking day of my life. I still have that imposter syndrome.
You do. And just for everybody listening who hasn't heard your full story or hasn't tuned into the podcast, growing up, you heard you were crazy all the time. You heard that if you spoke up or said what was going on, no one would ever believe you. And so it's that trauma that you've had your whole life, and undoing that as an adult, even if it's in a different context, is difficult for anyone with any kind of history of hearing you're not good enough, let alone what you went through, which is a whole nother level, Kait, and so I think, for everybody listening, that's also important to really understand. And, and in listening to your story, just for what you said before, I'm not sure if anybody would believe you. I think, at least from my experience, it wasn't that I didn't believe you. I couldn't hear it. I believed you, but it was unbelievable. Right. To me, it was unbelievable to even know that this was happening. It was happening to someone who was my age, who was, 20 minutes away and within an organization of where we had mutual friends. Like, holy shit. Like what, and to learn that for me was like that, oh shit moment. I am reaching out to you and I don't know if you're going to think I'm a crazy, right? In terms of like, hey, I'm going to help this girl. Like I'm just I don't even know, like the clueless, right? Financial advisor who's like, hey girl, like how are I help you? Want to be my friend? Like,
I like when you reached out, I texted Laurie and was like, oh my God, Nicole Overcamp just reached out. And that's like a big fucking deal. Like we need to connect with her because she's like the shit. Like like I didn't even know that, but it was like, no, I know that she's the shit. So we need
Do we hear the imposter syndrome flying?
Oh my, everywhere. Right? We're all so dumb, but we're
Laurie, I love how you're silently in the background and you're just speaking and like mic dropping these big gems of like what you're hearing back there, But yeah, it's hilarious that you say that, Laurie, because like on my end, yes, I was so nervous to message you, Kait, because I'm like, she might think I'm a crazy. Like, who is this person who knows nothing about nothing? But I was just like, so
you did it anyway. Do it scared.
Yeah.
Right?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's why we're entrepreneurs, right? And you just do shit.
Do it scared.
No. Sure.
So I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I just thought that was important for people to understand also like where you're coming from and your intense and extreme strength, right? For doing what you're doing as vocally as you're doing, because you're still getting threats. You're still dealing with this and it's blown up, right? So to keep going, I think just speaks to the person you are and why you're the person to be doing what you're doing too, right?
It's always such a complicated thing because we do talk about that, but yeah, obviously we all know that Kait is exceptional, but we also don't want people to think that this is only possible because Kait is exceptional. Right? People can do all kinds of things that you're afraid to try, things that you don't think you can do. You have to start somewhere.
Yeah, just right. We have also said, if someone like me can't get help, who the fuck can, right? If someone who is pretty articulate, like again, I'm not going to be like, I'm amazing. But if someone who is a well-supported, white, middle-class, suburban, individual who has no mental health history, has a functional job, if I can't get law enforcement and agencies to help and to engage, who can, right?
Yeah.
So that's how we came to Mezzo of like, you shouldn't have to be put together, look a certain way or whatever to receive the services that you need. There should be more available because if I can help, who the fuck can, Yeah.
It's a great point. And I think there's so much time, right? And I think that's the other thing that a lot of people don't understand, especially in New York, Kait, is like the amount of time it takes a survivor to actually talk, right? From any kind of sexual abuse, let alone what the family trafficking. And so, how many years on average? Like, what is that statistic where it takes at 20, right?
Well, so the average age of disclosure for sexual abuse across the board is 52. So 52 years old. That's the statistic. Yeah.
Well, of course. Look at how hard, how the statistic is 90 to 98% of sexual abuse allegations are considered credible. Even though that is true, we act like that is the opposite. Yeah. Society responds as if women are making this shit up. Like, right. It's not just women, it's men too, obviously. But therefore, it is so difficult to come forward and talk about.
Yeah. And I think too, for so long and the narrative is changing, thank God, with the Me Too movement and so on. But the narrative was, well, what did you do wrong? How did you put yourself in that position? Right. And so I think that adds to it. And even still, there's that stigma in 2024. You would think that this isn't a problem anymore. And I got to tell you, it's all over. Right. It's all over. We're all dealing with layers of that, and having it continue to exist without anybody being held accountable on the other end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, absolutely. And so, I literally said to Laurie recently, like the average age is 52, probably because at 52, you don't give a shit about, you're probably dead at that point. So you're not really like threats and like, whatever. So like, it makes sense to me. Yeah. And we say all the time, if I'm a survivor, in the background, watching what has happened to me on a public platform, right? The discrediting and the tearing apart and the threats, I wouldn't come forward either, right? And building a space where it cannot be that way for the and all the survivors coming after me. We got to make this safer. We have to make this better.
I kind of say anecdotally, my take on it is that there's 20% of the population that's actively doing evil. 20% of the population actively doing good, out there pursuing, and 60% in the middle that are just sort of being. Like, we need more people in that 60% to get on the boat, to come toward actively doing good, pursue meaningful things, show up for the people in your life, speak out against what is not okay, do the things, don't be a sheep.
Yeah.
What a difference that.
Yeah, you're so right, Laurie. And I think it's such a good point. And what is that? The bystander theory, is that what it is? Right. And I see that all the time too, all over the place. And I think, and sadly, we're living in a time where people get crucified for speaking up, crucified, regardless of their beliefs. Like, we have lost the ability as human beings to communicate, to have a difference of opinion, and be able to collaborate and work through a problem, right? Whether it's as devastating as yours or something very simplistic. And so, how can we do better, right? Like, what are some of the things that we can do better? We need to do better, especially as women and leaders. And so, and from your guys' perspective, like, what would be helpful? How can we help? How can we do more? Because there's not a single person listening to this podcast whose heart's not breaking for the story that you went through and everybody else. But I think to some degree, we're like, well, we feel helpless, right? We feel like, well, shit, who am I to help? What can I do? And what does that even look like?
Yeah. So we keep saying, education is the very first line of defense. There's a quote from, so Dr. Michael Salter, he's a criminologist out of Australia who's done a ton of work in organized sexual abuse and family controlled trafficking. And at the very beginning of his book, he talks about if you don't even believe that this type of abuse could happen, you'll miss it when it's standing right in front of you. And so we live by that, right? So the very first thing is you need to be willing to listen. And nobody wants to live in a world where mothers are making their children available for pedophiles. Nobody wants to live in a world where law enforcement isn't up to speed on these things. But we have to. And so we can't keep putting our head in the sand and saying, that's not real, that's not happening. We have to allow it to penetrate, to permeate our brains, and we have to be able to know. So how can you help? I mean, educate yourself, right? We have all kinds of resources on our website and our educational videos. Educate yourself. Start the conversation in your circles of influence, right? You never know who that person is going to be that you're talking to that's like, hey, I actually do need to know about that because I come into contact with potential victims or I come into contact with children. So education is really at the very beginning of it, just knowing that this can exist. It drives me crazy when, survivors of sexual trauma are a subset of people that I have a pass on this. Okay, if you can't listen to our podcast because it triggers you, 100% take care of yourself and your brain and don't listen. But we've heard a lot of people say, I just don't want to listen. It's kind of icky and it's hard and it makes me sad. No, you need to grow a pair and you need to listen and absorb the information, because again, if you don't even believe or know that this could happen, you will miss it when it is standing right in front of you. It's also, everybody comes into contact with people. So we have trainings planned for hairstylists, right? Everybody goes to their hairstylist. They tell their hair, there's like basically a second therapist, right? Everybody's,
yeah.
Right. But would we ever think that a hairstylist needs to be educated on human trafficking? Are they? Probably not, right? So it starts with education. It starts with knowledge. How can you help do that? Get involved, right? Educate yourself. We have an organization that can help you do that.
Yeah.
Keep promoting that. Like, I hate this.
But you have to, right? And I will say, when I started listening to the podcast, it was heavy. It was hard. I didn't like it. I loved you guys, but I didn't like it from the perspective that, like, you guys know I walk all the time. Like, that's when I was listening to it, of course. And like, I found myself like getting angry. Like, I was listening to your podcast and and I'm also super weird. Like, I fantasize about being attacked while I'm walking so I can beat somebody up. And for Laurie, I know you're probably like dissecting me right now. Like, you have anger issues, but like, I sometimes do. And it's like, oh, this would be so fun. Like, yeah, come at me, bro. Right. Let me kick your ass. And so I think of all the things that I would do in my head, and by the way, I'm completely not like, I've never been in a fight in my life. And my husband is always like, you would be in trouble. And so like, that's probably not a good thing to play out in my head as like a thing, but that's what was like literally happening to me. And I was like, this thing inside of me was like bubbling up, and I was getting so angry the more I listened, and I wasn't sleeping. I was losing sleep. It was uncomfortable and undesirable. A privilege. I didn't go through the shit that you went through. I owed it to you in my mind to listen, to figure this out. And that's what led me to reaching out to you, because I was like, this is too much. It is too heavy to not fight for it, to not do something. And I think, for me and for a lot of us probably we're all more alike than we are different, right? Especially the listeners to this podcast. It's like, I don't want to hear about these statistics. I don't want to hear Kait talking about this and not have a solution, or at least try, right? It's like always nails on a chalkboard to me, is like, okay, yeah, this is hard to hear. It's uncomfortable. It's gross. It's something that most of us can't relate to. And we do want to say like, oh, this doesn't exist because I don't want to look at it, right? This is ugly. I don't want to look at this. And it gives me anxiety about my kids. Like, good. It should give you anxiety. It should make you uncomfortable. It should make you cry, or angry. But yes, to put action behind that. Exactly, Laurie. And that's the point that I'm trying to make, is so many of us talk about what we want to see change, or we complain about the things. Look at the last 20 decades of us complaining, women, about how we're not making as much, but how many women are actually out there advocating for themselves to make more, right? And of which is why I'm putting together this summit, of which we'll talk about too. But like, that's so important. And I just want to highlight that to your point of growing a pair, Kait. It's like, yeah, warning, explicit content, but warning, if you want to see the change, you have to know that it exists. And also, if you have kids, like, those are your babies, right? You owe it to them to work together to figure it out, right? And it is uncomfortable. It absolutely is uncomfortable. How can it not be, right? So, sorry, I didn't mean to like just tangent there, but I couldn't help myself, because it really is. It's so important. What, Kait?
Across the board, there's like, when we face something hard, you can choose to look away and avoid it because you don't want to be uncomfortable, or you can figure out how you're going to stretch yourself to have more resilience to be able to face the hard thing.
Yeah, that's right.
If need more people figuring out how else and face the hard thing. What you said before, Nicole, the survivors out there don't have the privilege of saying, no, thank you. I don't want to deal with this. So those of us who have the opportunity to grow and come alongside them, we shouldn't take that opportunity either. That's not fair.
Yeah.
We should talk about Mezzo Allies. However.
Yes, Jenny, please. So let's get it. So let's, you, and just for everybody listening, I'll give like the cliff notes. And then of course we'll have everything in the show notes for you guys to find this out on your own. So you had the podcast, The Ugly Truth About the Girl Next Door. You told your story, you told your journey. It blew up and went viral. And then you had all these women reaching out to you saying like, shit, me too. I thought I was crazy. And that was your fire saying, I need to do more. Mezzo was born. Okay. Mezzo is the nonprofit organization that Kait is the founder of. Laurie has helped. Laurie has been alongside Kait this entire time, is like the world's best support system. And so what is Mezzo Allies? Why is it different? Who are you helping? What does this look like?
Yeah. It's a nonprofit organization, super baby nonprofit. We literally just became a thing in July and just got our 501c3 in September. Our entire mission is to make the world a safer place for survivors of family-controlled trafficking, right? What that looks like is we provide training and education to the helpers of the world, is essentially what we say. So anybody who is in a position where they could come in contact with a potential victim. So that means healthcare workers, teachers are a big one. We've done trainings for Department of Child and Family Services staff, for district attorney staff, law enforcement, child advocacy centers. Really, really, really trying to make them aware. So it's really about awareness. we are also working on and hope to launch soon support groups for not only survivors, but also their advocates. Because the reality is anyone who says the hard yes to walking through what it takes for a survivor to truly get from continued victimization to safety and healing, they need an advocate, and those advocates have to have support. Laurie and I were doing this together and jumping through all of these hoops and going to law enforcement and going to these places, not really knowing what are our rights. What's my rights as a victim, right? What are my options? What do I have to say? What don't I have to disclose, right? And so the support person, though, also needs to be up to date on all of those things and have some support of you're not alone in this. It takes a village. It takes a team of people really to get a survivor from victimization to safety. These offenders this type of offender is not your average creeper. They are more sociopathic, more psychopathic. They don't stop. And so it takes an advocate to stand in that wind, to really take the brunt of that. And Laurie has done that for me, but the world needs more Lauries, right? And needs support. So yeah, having support groups around, again, both victims who are like, hey, I don't know what to do. We then have a group of volunteers who have said the hard yes to I will advocate them together. So Mezzo Allies has an advocate for you. And Laurie and I stay very connected to our volunteers. What do you need? What supports do you need from us to be able to now help the survivor through that?
And part of the mission of Mezzo is very much to educate. We've said the education piece, but those first responders, because the advocates and the survivors should not have to fight so hard the very systems that are supposed to be in place to help.
Yeah.
And so a lot of what we've been doing lately, as in our baby organization, is out there training a lot of the responders so that it's an easier path forward for the advocates. And unfortunately, that costs money. And that's the part that you have a hard time talking about.
Yeah, you can talk about
that. Money. Honestly, we've been so grateful to have opportunities to go and speak in other child protective staff, to be forensic interviewers that interview children.
We're going to Idaho. I don't even know if I told you this, Nicole. We got hired to go to Idaho, at Fort Hall, Idaho, which I literally had to look up on a map. I'm like, I don't know where Idaho even is. Like, I wasn't a educator. Like, I don't even know. But yeah, like, so.
And travel costs money.
So cool. Yeah.
And it is such an incredible opportunity. And the response that we've had so far has been so incredibly positive. And the momentum that is being gained by more and more of these first responder type people hearing about it. And they're telling other people, we're getting more and more requests, frankly. Can you come and train our staff? Can you come and train our staff? That costs money. The other thing that costs money is conferences, right? We need to be able to get to anti-trafficking conferences where we need to be speaking to the people who are in this realm, but aren't necessarily connecting the dots about the family piece. But the funny thing we found out about conferences is not only do you not get paid to speak at those, you have to pay to go to those. You have to pay the full entrance fee, which for some of these is upwards of $1,000 for the two of us, right? To go to, there's an anti-trafficking conference in Salt Lake City in April, where we're hopefully going to pair that with Fort Hood.
What is in Utah, Kait? In Utah.
There you go.
We would.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. It's Alex's math. Yeah. So we're
just messing with you.
I'm like, wait, what? A 2.5-hour drive. I Googled it, Nicole.
From Salt Lake City to Fort Hood. Yes. But if the entrance fee to even have a table at that conference is $2,000.
Yeah. We had at a conference in Texas, actually, which was really cool because
college students and college professors, right?
Yeah, who are about to launch into the field of social justice and social work. And they were like, please, can you come and do, a keynote thing? And we were so excited. But we had to cover our own travel costs and we had to pay to be at the conference. And Mezzo was just formed like 6 months ago.
So there wasn't money to do it.
Yeah. And so unfortunately for that one, they when we declined, they offered us a virtual option, which is always like, so we are actually going to have that opportunity. But yeah, it costs money to be able to sometimes say yes to these things that are really important to continue spreading awareness and continue spreading the message.
Not to mention sustaining ourselves in the meantime while this takes off.
Yes,
right? So
that too.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you guys have dove in full time. This is a full-time job that you are simultaneously volunteers for, you guys. So, and I think that's important to talk about. Like, I think the assumption is you're getting paid all this money to go speak at these things, but that's not how this works. And the more that we can spread awareness also saves people from having to listen to your podcast, wink, wink, but but it's so true. And so, I admire you both. I could talk to you about this forever. And I think maybe we should do a second podcast and a follow-up, right? And our summit, Becoming PowHERHouse, March 8th, is going to be donating all of the profits from our summit to Mezzo Allies, to this organization, because I really do believe in you guys so much in what you're doing and want to support you. And so hopefully you're coming to the summit because it's going to be awesome. The speakers that we're going to have that are actually speaking to all the things that women need to hear more of, to be their own best advocate, to get what they want in life and to change the statistics, but also coming together to make an impact, you guys. Like we have this innate privilege and ability to not only grow ourselves and to learn from phenomenal speakers, but in coming together to make a change, to have a purpose and to make an impact and to do this thing together, to support you guys, to stand behind what you're doing, because it is so hard. And it's not just hard, but like, and what you guys don't see is it's like that iceberg, right? They're talking, they're laughing, they're having this great time on this podcast, talking about the organization that they are building to be advocates, to raise awareness around this cause, but they're still getting the shit kicked out of them every single day, from lawsuits, from threats, from the relentless people who continue to go after them. And so, that is not talked about. That is not seen behind the smile. And so I just want to make mention of that, because the more that we can support them and the more love that they feel, the easier it becomes to do the hard things. And that's with anything. I mean, think about the last time that you dealt with a traumatic experience, right? When you went through trauma, grieving a death, or something you experienced, and the more support you had, it didn't make the loss easier, but it made it easier to get through the day. And so keep that in mind, you guys. And in the show notes, we will have everything. We're going to have links to the podcast, links to Mezzo Allies, the ability to donate, the ability to come to the summit, meet them in person, have that conversation, a link to book them to speak, and pay them for that, by the way. For the organization. And so it's so fundamental and crucial to start raising these dollars and raising awareness. And so thank you both so much for showing up today. Today in itself was a circus, I know. And so I'm so grateful for the two of you coming on and doing this thing. And so before we end, is there anything left that you definitely want to make sure is said today on this episode?
Just that I feel always like this is so like cliche, but I genuinely am so grateful. I'm grateful to you, Nicole. I talk about you all the time. I don't know if your ears ring at all, but I'm always like, oh my God, I'm so thankful for your support. And this outpouring of support and this organization that we're now doing, I never could have imagined, right? Like I never ever, I just never thought that was possible. So I'm forever grateful and always humbled and always like, who are we? So yeah, just thank you, I guess, for having us, for supporting us, for helping us. We're so grateful. So that's it.
I'm grateful you're doing what you're doing, sister. So thank you. Thank you so much. And until next time, my PowHERHouses, continue to be courageous.